How's it going? And welcome to episode 197 of On the Wire, a proud member of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. Follow the pod on the Twitter and on the YouTube at On the Wire Pod. I am Adam Howe. You can follow me at 80 Grade everywhere. You could spell that's all spelled out, of course. Kevin Hastings can be followed at Hastings Kevin on the Twitter and at Chasing Winds at Blue Sky. We got a great show. We're doing this back to back, Kevin. For all those who are watching at home, thank you so much for coming right back in and joining us. For those listening back to back, great. We're going to get right into some news that we missed out on the last episode. But we are going to talk speed here. And for those who are watching live in the last episode, know that I already started talking about speed. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to talk all about it again, which is perfectly fine because maybe I can fine tune some of that response. But Kevin, glad to have you back here. What's changed in the last, 5 minutes that we've been we've been apart?
Not a whole lot. I did consider changing my T-shirt for those watching live, but you can only see the shoulders blue T-shirt, which is what I have on almost every episode anyway because of all my Royals T-shirts. It does happen to be my Cole Reagan's Ace is going to Ace Pitcher List T-shirt. But other than that, and I didn't make that change. No, everything's still great, and now we get to talk a little speed.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about speed. Of course, we do these preview episodes throughout the off season, usually around this time of year as well. And we go the same way we do our in-season episodes, category by category. So we do power, we do speed. We'll have an episode on opportunity where we focus on batting average and playing time. And then we'll go into the pitching ones. We'll go with volume. We'll go with wins and Ks on one episode. We'll do ratios on another episode. And of course, close it out with saves, everybody's favorite thing to project and guess on as the offseason goes on. But before we talk about hitters in their speed, we did have some news, and it's all pitcher related. So let's get some pitcher related news on this Pitcher List podcast here. Let's start off with some starters, Kevin. Charlie Morton signs a 1-year deal with Baltimore. You know what? I'm gonna list them all out. And we don't need to play ask, but I want you to, they're all 1-year deals. And I want you to kind of compare and contrast them as, again, 1-year deals. These are all elder statesmen, too, of the starting pitching community. Charlie Morton, 1-year deal with the Baltimore Orioles. They did spend some money. Look at that. I thought they weren't allowed to. Justin Verlander signs a 1-year deal with the San Francisco Giants. And then Martin Perez joins the White Sox in their rotation on a 1-year deal of his own. Overall thoughts on which one of these guys will find the most success with their new teams? Obviously, a lot of variables here. Justin Verlander just completely falling off the face of fantasy relevancy in the second, if not the whole season, definitely the second half of the season last year. Definitely was one of the worst trades I ever made. Trading for Justin Verlander at my trade deadline, where he did absolutely nothing for me. Martin Perez joining a obviously not a very good White Sox team. And then Charlie Morton is who he is, it seems, just going to be doing that in Baltimore. So can you find a way to be excited about any of these?
Excited? Probably not. But I think all three of these guys, for different reasons at different points in the season, will have some fantasy relevance, right? I think if we're chasing wins, I'm looking at Charlie Morton, but the last couple of seasons, he's going to kill your whip, right? You probably don't want Charlie Morton in your lineup, even in what you consider a good matchup every single time. He's somebody that you can use throughout the season. He'd be a team streamer, but not necessarily, right? You would want reasons not to use the other pitchers on your roster.
Right.
And Charlie Morton then could become an option, not just because Charlie Morton's got a good matchup, if that makes sense, because of that whip in a roto league, which is typically what we're referring to. Martin Perez is the opposite end of chasing wins, but we've seen for 3 seasons now he can go out there and deal in certain situations. I mean, we're not going to see 2020. Was that 2021 when he was just absolutely amazing? I know we're not going to see that again. But even in 2024, we talked about him on our weekly show throughout the season multiple times when he was available in a good matchup. And Justin Verlander, I was shocked at the amount of money he got. But then
Sure.
after reading a little bit about the Giants having a fairly young pitching staff, and might be more of a mentorship thing, bringing in Justin Verlander, that makes sense to me. That's an expensive guy to be mentoring a
Right.
young pitching staff. And then we just never know. We've thought Justin Verlander was done before. So he could surprise us.
Sure.
He's probably uh, the dart I'm most likely to take to start the season. But yeah, I think all three of these guys will have value at some point throughout 2025.
Yeah, I am a little disappointed that Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer didn't find their way to Detroit at the same
I knew
time.
that's
But
where you were going.
he could have played the same role with Detroit, like being that mentor type of situation. But anyway,
Well,
the
as has been pointed out in many places, every team he's played for has had orange somewhere on the
you
uniform.
beat me to it. That was gonna be my next thing. I want him to be traded to Baltimore mid-season to finish out this career with all the orange. Between the Mets, Detroit, Houston, and now San Francisco. I think Baltimore is the only one left where orange is a prominent color. Oh man, I thought I was the only one that realized that. I'm not paying attention. Going back to Baltimore though, as I have Charlie Morton's ADP chart or player page of on NBC, you can see very clearly there was a pretty big spike overall in his draft position from the time that signing was made at the beginning of the month, January 3rd, and as you can see, he was being drafted pretty regularly. Right around pick, just shy of 500, and now he's regularly going up about 100 picks in the high, the high 300s, the 380 range on a regular basis. So chasing wins is a big thing, and you're gonna take it. It's kind of like drafting Kyle Schwarber, like we talked about last episode. You're gonna take the hit in your ratio, and you're probably gonna take the hit in the ratio with Morton as well, especially in the whip category. But those wins are, they can, hopefully that can even out for you if you can consistently keep going 5 or 6 innings for Baltimore. That bullpen should be, much better, of course. And then the team context is obviously very good.
Yeah, and the starts will be there for him.
Right, exactly.
He's listed as their number 3 right now, and I don't disagree with that.
And even if he was listed as the 4 or the 5, like that's a guy that you sign so that he can go out there as long as he's healthy every single day. He's not in contention.
And let him go deep.
Yeah,
They're not protecting this arm,
no.
right? So when we're chasing wins, the deeper he goes, the better.
Yeah, exactly. Moving into more pitchers here, but we got a lot of relievers, some of them more notable than others, of course, but I'm just going to rattle them all off, Kevin, and get your overall take on all of them. Sticking with the Orioles, they add Andrew Kittredge on a 1-year deal, $10 million, though. So we'll see what kind of role he plays there. Jeff Hoffman signs a 3-year deal with the Toronto Blue Jays. Michael Lorenzen joins your Royals on another 1-year deal, just $7 million there. Chris Martin goes home to Texas as he signs a 1-year deal with the Texas Rangers to join their bullpen. And then another bullpen note to make here is that the GM of Minnesota says Griffin Jacks will remain in the Twins bullpen. There were a little bit of rumblings here or there that they might stretch him out as a starter. But one of the best relievers in the game is going to stay a reliever for the 2025 season, or at least to start the season. Let's start off in Philadelphia with not in Philadelphia, in Toronto with the addition of Jeff Hoffman. He signs the biggest deal of this bunch, 3 years, a bunch of pay bumps that can happen based on how many innings he does pitch. What are your expectations He's not going to be probably not going to be stretched out based on these bumps that I'm seeing. Does this bump him up into closer territory for Toronto? Or do you expect him to kind of fill a very similar role as he did in Philadelphia?
Well, the quote from the general manager was he would be given the opportunity to close.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you give him $33 million, especially after Baltimore had offered him $40 million for 3 years and he had accepted, and then the medicals were flagged. You're not giving him that kind of money if you don't expect him to be your closer. I don't believe
Mm-hmm.
this is a big hit to, I think he is a closer over Chad Green and Yimi Garcia. It's a big hit to the share or two of Eric Swanson I have as a speculative closer in Toronto, because I think Hoffman does take that job if healthy.
Yeah, it makes a whole lot of sense. And drafters today, this news just came through or finalized, I think, earlier today, or yesterday. No, it was today.
That's
And
today.
you can see these drafts that all happened today are all adjusting accordingly.
Exactly.
So we see a nice high pick of 76. That's the new min for Hoffman.
By a
Um,
lot.
but even all these other, like these 173s, the
It was
161s, you knew that the draft that's where the draft was when the news broke, and you're like, oh, it's my turn. Okay, bing.
there. Yeah, I was in the Pitcher List Discord today. I was in the Bubba and the Bloom Discord, probably a couple of others as well. And everybody that was in drafts when this news broke was talking about how many picks away they were before it was their turn. That he went to the top of everybody's queue when this news broke.
There's always that moment in the offseason where I remember exactly where I was, and that's the equivalent of that. Like, I remember how many picks
Exactly.
all it can, this is, and literally the problem is that these are the moments, as rare as they actually are, that people hold on to just milk the clocks in slow drafts.
Right.
And
We'll probably see more of that over the next few days because of this. Absolutely.
absolutely. And that's as good of a time as any to remind everybody that we are kicking off our listener leagues, Kevin. They are 2-hour
Mhm.
slow drafts. We're not doing the fours. I think we did the fours last year. I couldn't bring myself to do that again. So there are 2 hours. We do have some openings in our first 15 teamers. So if anybody out there's listening and they want to jump in, is $50 buy-in, top 3 payout. All your standard main event style rosters on the NFBC platform. So we want to fill that one up. Our plan is to fill up 2 of these 15 teamers in the month of January, have them draft concurrently if we can fill them up quickly enough, and then do a couple of 12 teamers in February as well. So those out there interested, make sure you can ping either one of us, ping the On the Wire Twitter channel, wherever you can get in contact with us. We'll send you the link. We'll get you going. We're halfway through filling this first league. Hopefully we can get that filled up and draft starting ASAP.
I think we'll be drafting this by the time this show airs on Sunday, as
Love
we're
it.
recording on Friday night. I'm confident, or shortly after. And shout out to Casey Bubba and Ryan Bloomfield. Someone asked me about our listener leagues in their Discord, and I replied to shoot me a DM. Ryan Bloomfield, no, give the details here. Very cool of them to let us promote our leagues in their Discord as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Those guys are amazing. And if I don't know what you're doing, if you're listening to us and not them, sorry, you can stop listening to us and just go listen to them. For whatever reason, you are doing it the wrong way. But let's move on here. Any other? No, we'll just keep going through the list. Andrew Kittredge, that's a $10 million for a reliever for the Orioles. I'm not expecting him to close, but he is definitely a name that we have thought about in the past being into that position. What kind of role are you expecting out of him? Do you expect us to be in a position where we might be looking to pick him up during the season as he moves into prominent situations? Can he fit into that category? We always talk the ratio category for the Orioles.
100%. And we will definitely talk about him as we have in the past, and I don't think he'll be a zero saves either. I think he's the second in line, and if Felix Bautista needs a day or Baltimore needs a closer 3 days in a row, I think Andrew Kittredge will get you a handful of saves already, and he's probably next in line behind Bautista at this point, and we will definitely be talking about him as a ratio protector or booster in that role in the weeks that we want to add a third or even sometimes fourth reliever to our starting lineup for a scoring period.
Yeah, I haven't seen or heard anything about Felix Batista except for at the end of last year, wondering if he would actually like make some kind of weird appearance. So I'm assuming since it was that close at the end of the season, everything has went swimmingly so far for him throughout the offseason. And we
Drafters definitely seem to think so. He's
exactly.
going in that upper tier. Yeah,
Yes, I mean that bullpen between the trade deadline last year and this offseason definitely gotten a lot stronger. I mentioned that with Charlie Morton in addition and there, but
exactly.
Andrew Kittredge, Sir Anthony Dominguez being added last year as well. Junior Cano just being who he is. Obviously, I think we now know that Cano is just not that guy that's going to be the closer that we hoped he could be in filling into those shoes, but an amazing reliever in the right circumstances. So I have a lot more trust in this bullpen going into 2025. And so that would also allow the Orioles to not put as much pressure on Felix Batista to like come back going, I wonder how often he'll go back to back closers, never mind, 3 days in a row. I don't think that's on the table at all, especially in the first half of the season. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him being, babied a little bit, at least in the first 2 months of the season and not seeing any back to backs. So that could see more opportunities for Kittredge, at least early in the season when the Orioles are winning a couple more games back to back.
I could see myself, as long as he is performing as we have seen him in the past, almost setting and forgetting Andrew Kittredge in a lineup on some teams. You either were getting that ratio boost, and or we just never know when
Sure.
it,
Exactly.
because it
Yeah.
will depend on the outcome of games throughout a scoring period when we'll see him get those saves. So you may accumulate even double digits with him and those great ratios and some strikeouts, but just by having him in your lineup rather than a seventh starter.
Is Chris Martin, did he find a spot where he actually could actually have added value? Chris Martin was always my pick in Boston to kind of fill in for Kenley Jansen when he was either hurt or needed some time off or what have you. Rangers still don't have a replacement for Kirby Yates at the moment. Could this be the replacement, or not expectedly finding value in Chris Martin at this stage in his career? But did he kind of luck into a situation? Maybe.
Maybe that's where Jason has him on roster resource. He's got him in the closer role as of right now.
Mhm.
I still think Texas does go out and get another arm, most likely Kirby Yates. But this is as of right now. Uh, I don't think he would be the only guy, but as the way their roster is constructed at the moment, Chris Martin would probably lead the Rangers in saves.
I mean, there's nobody else in that lineup that stands out to me, at least in name recognition, at the very least, to like come in who's healthy. So unless you give somebody a new role that they're not working out in the rotation, and you want to try them out in a high leverage situation, maybe Tyler Mahle is not as healthy coming back from his surgery as maybe we thought. Maybe that would be the best role for him. But even Tyler Mahle, like maybe he's probably better in a swingman type of role instead of a high leverage spot. So yeah, I mean, he's the name, as you mentioned, he's top of the list on roster resource. I hadn't even looked at the roster resources page when I even suggested this. It just
Mhm.
seemed like, oh, okay. This just seemed like the perfect opportunity for him. He's going home. He's playing close to home. Yeah, it's just, we'll see how it works out and what
But
additions they make or don't make.
one little side note, here because we have the Rangers page pulled up. I am excited about Cody Bradford. And I don't think he'll be the fifth guy because he's the only lefty in that rotation. I think he's probably he moves up to at least to the third guy through the rotation. And I think we'll continue to see what we saw early in the season, and he repeated it when he came back. That is huge for me. So just a side note, really excited about Cody Bradford this year.
Cool. Last guy I think we worth mentioning here is I just curious because again, anything with the Royals, I want to know what your take is on what they're going to do with Lorenzen here. What's his role? It's not a big contract. He's had some flexibility with a couple teams that he's pitched for. He's always voiced his interest in being in a rotation. Where do you see Lorenzen kind of fitting in here with the Royals?
I think let me start with this. The Royals know both JJ Piccolo, the general manager, and the manager, Matt Quatraro, have talked repeatedly. They know how lucky they were with the health of their pitching rotation last season. And they do not expect for that to occur again. So you just pulled up, and they have 6 starting pitchers listed here. I haven't heard anything about the Royals going to a 6-man rotation, but I wouldn't rule it out, and that would bring down, the amount of starts for Cole Reagan, Seth Lugo, Michael Waka. That would be the downside of that. But the hope would be it keeps everybody healthy for the entire season again. And so that's a possibility. I am not 100% sold on Chris Bubich moving into the rotation because the increased velocity as a reliever helped him a whole lot. I think he was amazing as a reliever. I don't think people realize how good he was in 2024 as a reliever. So I'm not 100% sold that he wants to start. I'm not so sure the Royals want him to start because he's not going to be as good. We just know that as a starter as he was as a reliever. They held on to Alec Marsh when they let Brady Singer go, and they still have Kyle Wright, right? If he comes back healthy, so that gives them 7 starters here, and they'll need all 7 of them at some point. The other thing about Michael Lorenzen, I haven't heard this anywhere, but I don't doubt he may have taken less money to come back to Kansas City than he may have been offered elsewhere. His interview on MLB Network after the signing was how much he loves the Kansas City clubhouse, which makes sense. They've always been that type of team, especially now with guys like Bobby Witt Jr., Vinny Pasquantino, and I don't think there's a better clubhouse guy in baseball than Salvador Perez. So that would make sense. But I also believe they probably may not have told him he's definitely in the rotation, but they did tell him he would have that opportunity.
Yeah, I mean he said that I don't know when he went. I think it was when he went to Philadelphia. Like he said that after he signed, Lorenzen did. He's like, I signed here because they told me I would be in the rotation. And giving him, to say that you'll have the opportunity to join the rotation, to start the season with the rotation is different than being in the rotation. And
Right.
I would venture to guess that even if they told him something along the lines of you'll get the opportunity, that it will not last. And I think both parties will end up realizing exactly what you said. Like you are so much more valuable in a 2 to 3 inning role where you can just go all out. And you're right. He was amazing. Like he was very useful even in fantasy situations as somebody who can help your ratios in those 2 or 3 inning spurts. And he can go 2 or 3 times in a week doing that kind of a situation. And if he happens to vulture a win because of it, so be it.
Exactly.
So, all right, cool. Well, we're going to get into our speed categories here, runs and stolen bases. We're going to do that right after this quick break. All right, Kevin, let's talk about speed. Runs, which I feel like always get forgotten about. Stolen bases that get talked about almost too much. As you mentioned, you can get stolen bases from players that aren't even starting in lineups or playing, close to every day. I always looked. We have some poster childs of players that we always talk about, but now my new one right now is because I'm looking at you is Darren Blanco. Always bring him up. He's never starting a game, but he's always stealing bases.
Right. And neither one of us put him on our list for this episode because it goes without saying, right? We're going to talk about him all season long.
Yeah, later on we will go position by position for players that you can draft later. I definitely saw him multiple times, and I'm like, I'm definitely not going to put him. I'll see if Kevin does. But I think your last assessment you just said is absolutely right. Like, all right, he goes without saying, so I'm going to say him now. Get it out of the way. But you got to draft speed throughout the. All right, you talk about a lot. You talked about it in the last episode, and we'll mention it again later on, that there are players that you can stream. Like, you can stream stolen bases. We've been talking about this for seasons now. Stolen bases is something you can stream. A lot of people, I think, historically have really focused on home runs and just opportunity in general, and then crossing your fingers that you get some stolen bases here or there. But the right matchups with the right pitchers who allow a lot of stolen bases, and especially now with players that are literally just they're pinch running specialists, you can get them off the wire and stream that position. So does that make focusing on stolen bases that much less important in the early going than maybe a lot of people are thinking?
It does in my mind. There were 76 players in 2024 that stole at least 15 bases, and only 28 of them had 26 or more. So that's nearly 50 players, 49 players between 15 and 25 stolen bases that are available, many of them later in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of, again, it goes into the whole platoon situations. Like, how much work are you willing to put in, and how much focus are you going to be putting on throughout the course of the season as well. So this just adds more nuance to that situation. Now, I mentioned, like, usually they go hand in hand. We talked about players last week where, like, I was talking about Darton Varsho and going 20, 70, 70, 10. 70 70, there's two numbers there. One of them obviously is runs, and I feel like runs really gets forgotten about as a category for whatever reason. It's kind of like whip on the pitching side. It's always like the redhead stepchild to ERA. Runs, I feel like, is the same thing to RBI in general. Again, but this could just be a narrative in my mind. How are you kind of seeing the focus of drafting runs as a category, and how much is it toward what a player has typically done and what a player is going to do in the future based on team context?
The runs category, I think, even more so than RBI, it is where I pay attention to changes in lineup position. It's huge, so huge. So that is definitely something I take into account. I do want to correct something I said. The numbers I gave on the number of players with 15 to 25 stolen bases, that's Steamer projections for 2025, not what happened in 2024. I looked at the wrong page, but the point is the same. But yeah, absolutely. I've said this many times. I know it's kind of backwards, because I know so many other categories contribute to runs. If you hit a home run, you got to run, right?
Sure.
If you steal a base, you're more likely to be able to score a run. I understand that, but nothing correlates of any of the categories in fantasy baseball with your standings in your league than your standings in the runs category.
Yeah, and really the thing that correlates the most about runs is how often are you getting to the plate and how often are you getting on base. So the more opportunities you are being provided with, this is why leadoff hitters are always they're always going to have value regardless of how good they actually are.
And per plate appearance, the 9 hole is the second best. However, you get so many less plate appearances than the 2, 3, 4 hole.
Sure.
But that so-called second leadoff hitter
yeah,
is very valuable. Yes.
it makes it that much more valuable than just the 8 spot. It's like it seems like one spot away, but you're that much closer to the actual bats that are
Exactly.
going to knock you in. You just have to do your part to get on base. Something that really stood out to me, and we take these opportunities in these kind of episodes to talk about the first round because we never get to talk about those players throughout the season. As I look at the PLV projections, and I'm looking at runs specifically here, because stolen bases really are kind of spread out throughout the draft. Like you can
Yep.
find rabbits or guys that are getting 20, 30 stolen bases in any particular round. Like I go down to the 4th round and I see 4 guys that are projected to be 19 or more. If I go just a round later, there's 5 more guys. So it's like the stolen bases are spread out. But when it comes to runs, the first round is loaded with guys that are projected to score a ton of runs. Now, when you compare that to RBI, it's not as loaded. So it's like you can throw a dart in at any of these players and you're going to be in a good position for runs. So does that make it that much more important? And as you go down round by round by round, there's cliffs after cliffs after cliffs in run production, and it get that much harder to find the guy that's going to get close to 100 runs on the season. There are, like, of the 15 top guys in ADP from what I'm running here, all but of the hitters, there are 13 of the hitters, 13 of the 15 players in ADP are hitters, and only 3 of them are projected for less than 90 runs scored. And so does it make it that much more important to make sure you get one of those guys and not miss out on those? Like, there are a lot of them to choose from, but only in the first round. After the first round, it's slim pickings.
Yes, it does. And I'm also going to repeat the same thing I said in the power episode. This is why, right? This is why I am an advocate of those 2 top catchers, right? You have William Contreras. Many times when we see a catcher going high in ADP, it's just because position scarcity, and that's why people push back against it. My stance with William Contreras is where he's being drafted, it doesn't matter what position he plays. The fact that I can slot him in at catcher is amazing when the guy's projected for 99 runs and 92 RBI, right? Mid to late second round, that's what you're looking at for any hitter you're drafting. So yes, absolutely, I agree with that, and re-emphasizing it again, just like we did in power. This is when if you're taking 2 late catchers, you're probably only getting half the plate appearances that you're getting if you take 2 of the top, 10 or 11, as long as one of those 2 is the top 3 or 4 guy, and you're gonna score. You're gonna score some runs. That it helps huge when you're getting 180 maybe plus runs out of your catcher, and your opponents might be lucky to get 100 combined from the 2.
Yeah, and you mentioned it's a 20-70-70 rule for you. The 70s, that target average run that you're looking for across all positions. And we're going to get into it a little bit later, of course, those later position. How are you going to make up 70 runs? Because this was a tough one. This was a tough exercise to pick a player in every position that's going to help you in the runs category and the speed categories late in your drafts. It is slim pickings. So, like, how are you focusing certain positions to make sure you can get those buffers, where you can get them, as opposed to in the positions where you think it's a little bit more evened out?
Yeah, absolutely. And this will be evident when we start listing some of the players we've chosen.
Mhm.
It 100% is something we're looking at. We brought up that 9 hitter. At least 1 or 2 of the guys I brought up are probably 9-hole hitters that we'll talk about. We talked about it once again in the power episode. Second base, like I'm foregoing a little bit of my power there. I know I may have to make up for that earlier in the draft because it's not the early second baseman, but where I'm typically shopping for second baseman, I'm getting runs scored and hopefully some stolen bases and a decent batting average and forgoing that power. And just like when we talked about that, the opposite is true. We when we're giving something up, we need to be getting something in return. If we are getting something, we're probably getting something up after we get past those first couple of rounds, right?
Sure.
The 5 category guys dry up really quick. So it's something to really pay attention to. There are guys that I would absolutely roster on some teams, but I can't on others because of that exactly what we're talking about. You have to pay attention to what you're giving up and not give up too much of the same category from multiple positions in your lineup.
Yeah, and it's like you got to take advantage of where those positions are flush with cash as well, and
Yes.
make sure that you're not missing out on that. So there's only 15 starters at each position in each team, and if you're finding a way to like either double dip into that, you can play defense. Like there are ways to play defense in your drafts. If you start noticing other teams are, especially in slow drafts where you have a little bit more time on your hands to analyze your opponent's strategies, you're realizing, hey, not only are you missing this position, but you're also a little low on this stat, this stat, this stat, at least according to your
Mhm.
projections that you trust. And you can make your decisions based on that. It probably shouldn't be your top reason for making a position or a decision, but it should and can influence the way you draft based on what you're seeing out of your opponents.
Yeah. Once again, we don't get to talk about the first round very often, but you like to really emphasize this point, and you're 100% correct that runs and stolen bases don't always correlate, right? Juan Soto, we don't expect to get double-digit stolen bases out of him, but he's projected for the second most runs, right? So when we're talking a speed category, of course, in later rounds, that it's not going to be 128 runs that we're
Yeah.
being projected, but we can find guys that are projected or we believe will get us runs scored, then they may not steal many, if any, bases.
Yeah, I mean, and then the other end of that is true. He's like you have guys, especially even in the first round. I'm looking at Vlad Guerrero, 96 runs scored
Yep.
projected by PLV. He's not stealing me double digit stolen bases. No matter he'll have that week where he steals like 4 bases somehow. But that'll be the 4 bases that he steals throughout the course of the entire season as
Marcus
well.
Simeon's not going to steal 20 for us anymore, but if he continues to play every day atop that Rangers lineup, he
Exactly.
will score over 100 runs.
Yeah. Excellent, excellent. I mean, any other like general thoughts on targeting speed? I think speed. I think that a lot of this changes. Again, you said this before when you are really seeing how teams are adjusting their lineups and changing positions. The battle. I don't know if even it's a battle, but like the situation that comes to mind for me right now is in Seattle with the appearance of Victor Robles and also that contract, the extension that they signed him to, basically taking over for JP Crawford at the top of that lineup. And that was where all JP Crawford's value was, the fact that he was at the top of that lineup every single day, regardless of position. And then basically all of a sudden, he just wasn't anymore. And now it seems as though moving forward that he won't be. And so things can change on a whim. But like I mean, how quickly are you making kind of adjustments in your expectations and your rosters throughout the season when you see these changes made, and how much are you really putting stock into the position that the player is playing, and you're like, you know what, JP Crawford's been so good no matter what. How much of it was the fact that he was at the top of the lineup, and how much of it was just his actual talent?
Oh, it was a large portion of it had to do with him being the leadoff hitter and just getting to volume. Um, he wasn't giving us the quality of production of a Marcus Simeon, but it's the same rationale, right?
Right.
That's the volume got him there. Looking at Victor Robles, and this is something I want to actually bring up, right? 295 plate appearances last year, 34 stolen bases. Now, 44 runs scored. That's a huge number of runs scored in less than 600 plate appearances. Many of them, I shouldn't say many, a portion of those he probably did not start that game and came in as a pinch runner, especially earlier in the season before they started using him on a regular basis. Now they're jumping him to they're almost doubling his plate appearances on projections. Steamer has him for 484, Fangraphs depth charts at 560, and about the same number of stolen bases. Right now, was that many of his stolen bases as a pinch runner? Because typically when you're pinch running, it's going to be a situation in the game where they want you to steal that base.
The reason,
too,
yeah, exactly.
right. But at the same time, if he's going to get on base at a 380 clip, which he has over the past 2 seasons, I'd expect definitely 40 stolen bases and maybe even pushing 50 in that spot. Seattle even let JP Crawford run, right? His most of his value was in the run scored with a good batting average, right? But if he's going to be in the lineup here, I think the projections could be a little low on his runs and his stolen bases, right? Because doubling his plate appearances and they're keeping the stolen bases about the same, and they're not nearly doubling the run production. It's about a 50 to 60% increase, it appears. So this is the kind of thing I look for. Also, what may not be taken into account yet in his projections is not just that he's going to be in the lineup every day. They have him for 130 games leadoff, right? Because Victor Robles has always been at the top or the bottom. That's nearly 150 plate appearance difference for most teams.
Yeah, I mean, and with that kind of volume, he's obviously not Kyle Schwarber, but with the volume, he can luck himself into double digit home runs, and he cannot hurt you in those other categories and in the power side of things. Obviously, you're not drafting Victor Robles, for that, but maybe he's not just the true rabbit with the volume that comes with being at the top of the lineup as well.
Still just 27 years old. And I always go back to this point with Victor Robles. He battled injuries in the minors. He was ahead of Juan Soto in that organization.
He was.
And we would not have seen Juan Soto the first year we saw him probably if Victor Robles had been healthy.
Mm-hmm. And now I think they play for the same amount of teams, or different amount of different teams. Excuse me. All right. Well, let's get into some of these choices that we made at the end of drafts. Again, we go look at post 325 in the speed categories at different positions. We're going to do that right after this break. All right, you are still listening to On the Wire. Of course, this is episode 197. We are talking all things speed as we preview 2025 drafts category by category. Of course, we're going to lump in both speed categories here with runs and stolen bases. We took a look at players that are going post 325 in all completed online championship drafts, which has only been 5 of them. But we were trying to keep it in that 12-team mix as well. But that, honestly, I feel like, Kevin, that's 5 more than we normally see finished this time of year. They did start a little bit earlier on the books, and there's some going on right now as well. So it's a decent, I also looked at ADP over the last like 3 weeks just to like get a better sense of like a larger sample size for my picks. I did most of my picks, if not entirely, based on PLV projections as well. So my picks will be also based as like a mini PL bot kind of pick as we go through this exercise. But we're going to go position by position, starting with the corner infielders, and we are lumping in catcher into that as well. It's kind of it's another corner of the infield, technically not an infielder though. So, Kevin, I'm going to let you start us off here because I threw in Hunter Goodman as well, but we just talked about Hunter Goodman in the power category. But the fact that he gets so much volume, possibly getting so much volume at catcher, he still becomes viable in the speed categories, at least on the run side of things, at the catcher position. But you've got a better name on here than that.
Well, your name's going to steal more bases. Mine's just we're talking catcher here, so non-zero is a good
What
thing.
you're looking for, sure.
And and I'm going with Patrick Bailey of the San Francisco Giants, who had an up and down 2024, and especially in the batting average category, he would go. He was a catcher too on many of my teams, and he could go days at a time without getting on base in certain streaks. I think that was being a young catcher, and he's so good defensively. They want him in the lineup. I think he was wearing down a little bit, and he's so good defensively that's what he concentrates on. But that 9 hole in the lineup, where on a per plate appearance basis, we should see plenty of runs scored for a catcher. Patrick Bailey, right? We're talking after pick 325. Going back, if people may remember on the last episode, I used Danny Jansen in the power category. Patrick Bailey, I am much more likely to draft as my third catcher in a draft and hold than I am Danny Jansen, because when I need my third catcher, Danny Jansen may be injured, right? I'm
Sure.
much more likely to use that pick on a guy like Patrick Bailey. And Patrick Bailey's a guy that certain weeks may be my catcher too, in a draft and hold format like that. So I love the production here and the fact that he did steal 4 bases in 2024, non-zero. Same in 2023, combined minor league and MLB time, 4 stolen bases. 2022 or 2021, he actually had 7 in the minors, right? So he's going to be a non-zero, and it'll be opportunistic at times. And in that 9-hole run scored out of my catcher, a guy that's not quite projected for the 500 plate appearances, but he's getting close. So if I don't get one of those top 10, 11 catchers I've been talking about that I really want 2 of, I'm waiting a while and drafting Patrick Bailey.
Yeah. Oh, I'm
Yeah,
not
look
muted.
at that second half.
Oh yeah, that second half for
I
Bailey.
think he wore down. I really do.
Yeah, you can see obviously he had some missed time in there as well. So I
Yep.
mean that
Yep.
there's probably a reason for that. The other shout out, it was hard to like in a weird way, it was hard to pick just one catcher because they at this stage of the game, it was like, all right, well, who cares? I was just again, same thing I did with Powers, just looking for the catcher I thought might actually get extra playing time. Now, the addition of Carson Kelly in Chicago makes this maybe a little bit more gray, but Miguel Amaya is somebody that I mean, at least I'm watching, especially, I mean, not especially, but just in the runs category too, slated to be in the 9-hole, at least according to roster resource. I can't imagine that changing a whole lot unless he just really goes off and forces their hand for whatever reason. But he, could score extra runs being in that 9 spot. Both righties, Kelly and Amaya, so it's not going to be an obvious platoon split. It's just going to be a playing time, production split at the catcher position for the Cubs, unless they make some other kind of move here. But Amaya's shown us some stuff in the past, moving up through the ranks as well with Chicago. That they did. Kelly is the new guy there. He has kind of moved around a couple teams so far. So I'm wondering, do you think Kelly takes away a lot of that playing time, or do you think it's more of a 50-50 split, or do you think Amaya can hold on to like a more of a 60-40?
That's my hope, and I can't remember who I heard say this. It was not Sarah Sanchez. She is who we should ask, but
Sure.
I feel like Carson Kelly is because the Cubs, I think, have publicly said they want to go with that 6-man rotation. So I think Carson Kelly probably catches 2 of those pitchers, right? And then that gives Amaya 2/3 of the playing time, which would mean we can bump up his projections because Steamer's only projecting him for 285 plate appearances. That's my hope. This is one of those players that if we could bump up his playing time, he's going to move up our lists a little bit.
Yeah, Amaya, at least PLV has him closer to the 450 plate appearance range as well. So it seems as though
Nice.
Kyle
Yes.
might be
That would be
making
the
that
2/3,
assumption.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's move off a catcher because it's so much easier to not talk about catchers at all. Let's move right around the diamond here to first base. Who are we looking to fill some speed late at the first base position, Kevin?
Um, I moved in positions. I used this guy in our power episode, and so there's not much left to say. If you weren't listening, Luke Raley in Seattle, he is a pretty strict strong side platoon bat. Strict enough that I would venture to say he starts every game versus a righty, and very few, if any, versus lefties. Will pinch hit versus righties when he doesn't start, and will get pinch hit for versus lefties when he does. So, but once again, he was a guy that we listed as a possible 2020 guy going into 2024. Didn't get there in the stolen base category, but he's got he's got some speed. He did steal double digit bases, and I expect him to be, towards the middle of that Seattle lineup on the days he does play. So the runs scored should be there. Roster Resource has him in the 5 hole, behind Randy Rosarina. I think Randy Rosarina needs to improve, or versus righties, Luke Raley should be their cleanup hitter behind Cal Raleigh. So the plate appearances will be there for the runs scored. And just like we said, you have to be the type of fantasy manager that is going to play your matchups. You can't just leave Luke Raley in your lineup, or you won't get enough plate appearances out of that position slot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, first base also very difficult, especially when we're looking at the speed. You got to look for the very nuanced player that is adding that kind of. And mostly you're focused here on the runs category. Out of that first baseman, Noel Chenul was my pick here at first base. But if you look at what I'm looking at in the ADP of post 300 range. I keep using the term slim pickings, but like anybody who's being projected, there's only after pick, current pick, 400. You're not finding anybody that's going to score more than 60 runs, at least on the projection. PLV projections has, we have Lamont Wade Jr. with 63 runs scored as a projection. Justin Turner has 61. Some of these will be adjusted before spring training even hits. Juan Yepes has 60. But besides that, most of these projections are in the 30 to 40 range at most. Chenul, 76 runs scored, 11 stolen bases as part of his PLV projections. Not hurting you in the power categories either. Not going to get you to that 20 home run average that you're looking for, but going to be a little bit easier to pair him with somebody a little bit higher than that throughout your early parts of your draft. And again, these are post 325 picks. These are not your starting first baseman. These are not your starting corners in most cases either. But you are trying to target players that can chip in the speed categories if that's how your draft is. And you know what? If you also need a backup corner infielder, this is kind of how that kind of your draft is going to lay itself out for you. So yeah. Nolan Chenul of the Angels, somebody if he's gonna get back to everyday playing time at first base, assuming that Mike Trout is only going to go to the corner outfield and not actually move to the infield, we can
right.
We can expect a decent amount of runs scored from Chenul at that position.
And we could see him in the leadoff spot at least for a while till we see Zach Neto make his comeback. I think they probably want to move Neto up to that spot, but we still don't know when we're going to see Zach Neto. It could be for opening day, but we just haven't heard anything. So yeah, if Shanuel is up there in the back at the leadoff spot, even better.
I'm gonna jump right into my third base because I love your third base pick, and I want to save that one for the last one. I was disappointed in myself for not picking yours at some point because he's eligible to a bunch of spots. But anyway, um, Joey Ortiz of Milwaukee, just one of those very rare circumstances at third base where this is what he's. Well, this is why you're drafting Joey Ortiz. You expect that defense is going to keep him on the field on an everyday basis. He can volume his way in, but he's not really providing. He's not exactly a rabbit, but he's going to steal you a decent amount of bases for what he does, especially at that position. And as I double check his projections here, at least according to PLV, he's not even popping up anymore. Oh, cool. Well, I'll have to figure out how to use Control F a little bit better than that. But Joey Ortiz of Milwaukee at the third base position, you can definitely do worse. And again, very same argument with Shanuel. You know, this is not somebody you're targeting, but if that's how your draft has worked itself out, you want to keep him in your queue to make sure that's an option.
Yeah, absolutely. I would have used Joey Ortiz as my third baseman if you hadn't done that first, because my guy I can move almost anywhere.
Sure. Well, let's get into it because your choice here, not only can he play everywhere, but he doesn't play. So this is just an interesting situation. Like we talk about guys that we are looking at in the offseason to stream the stolen bases. But if he can play every base, then he's worth in certain situations a bench spot and not having to actually spend the money to stream him throughout the course of the season. Yeah, so why don't you take it away and I'll stop beating around the bush of who this player actually is.
I think a lot of people probably have this figured out. We're talking about Dylan Moore here, and Adam, that he played 135 games, have 440 plus plate appearances last year, for first time in his career, and he's projected to have even more in 2025. So to your point, he is a batting average drain and a bad one. His best batting average in the last 4 seasons was 224. He's hit under 200 and just barely over 200 in the other 2 seasons, including 201 with all of those plate appearances. Now, fortunately, first of all, in an OBP league, he's amazing, and he wouldn't be available in this spot. If I'm drafted in an OBP league, he'll go much earlier. He's going to have projected for a 320 OBP. He's had better than that in the past, as high as 368 in 2022, 358 in 2020. So for real baseball, his batting average isn't the detriment that it is to our fantasy rosters. And Seattle has embraced that and gave him, close to full-time playing time last season, and he's projected for even more in 2025. The batting average is horrible. So he's not somebody, even though he's going to steal 30 plus bases, most likely. That's what he's projected for. That's what he did in 2024. The only reason we haven't seen that in the past is he didn't get the playing time that he's now getting. But he's not somebody I'm going to leave in my lineup every scoring period, to your point. He was a platoon hitter in the past, short side. Maybe we should treat him as such in our fantasy rosters so we don't take such a huge batting average hit and we can still get a good number of stolen bases out of him. That's an idea. You'd probably have to use him a little more often than that if he's taking up a roster spot for you. But with the position eligibility, the runs scored are going to be there on a per plate appearance basis. He is a 75 runs over a full season guy. Yeah, Dylan Moore, I think it's overlooked because of that horrible batting average. And yes, it's a drain, but you don't have to leave him in your lineup every scoring period. He's a great guy. We talk about team streamers as a pitcher. This is the epitome of a team streamer as a hitter for me because he can back you up at every position.
Yeah, exactly. It's always nice to have one of those guys. And if he
Yep.
is going to provide you with that much value, even at just one position, most of the guys that fill in a bunch of positions, you're like, fine, I feel okay just throwing him in whenever. He's a great bench spot. But at the very least, with he's kind of a double-edged sword, obviously, right? Like he's going to help you so much in stolen bases. And as you mentioned, if you leave him in too long, he's going to actually drain your batting average. And that's what we care about. What we're talking about here, of course, is the OBP is a little bit different, but that actually hurts us because his OBP is so good. He's actually getting more playing time and then draining our batting averages.
He's not getting as many at bats as it would appear when you look at his plate appearances because those walks aren't at bats. So it
There we
may
go.
not
That's a
hurt
good point.
quite as much as you think.
It's the opposite of the Juan Soto argument about whether or
Right.
not his
Adley
batting average
Rutschman a couple of years
matters
ago.
as
Right.
much in the first round.
Yep.
As I pull up the lineup cards on roster resource from the Mariners, you see obviously he has had like you said, he had a lot of plate appearances last year, more than I even expected to see.
The second half, he played almost every day.
Yeah, until the very end of the season where he went back into that short side platoon, as you kind of mentioned, with a occasional start against a righty. But he's still getting the thing is that this only is showing us his starts. He's still getting plate appearances on his days off as not just a pinch runner, but also as a pinch hitter as well.
Absolutely. The more I think about it, I want him on my NFBC teams because I always talk about having my coverage for the weekend. This makes my fab process a little simpler if I know I have one guy covering everything except my first baseman.
There you go. And there's lots of first base outfield eligible players that can fill that
Exactly.
role. I do this on my daily league teams where I always make sure like I have the least amount of hitters so that I can roster as many pitchers as possible, but I have to have at least two eligible two players at every position eligibility wise. It's not that hard to do because it's a Yahoo league, but it is nice to have the minimum amount of hitters, and I can especially on Mondays and Thursdays, I'm able to at least get everybody into the lineup and get as many plate appearances in those weekly leagues. Those actually go just as far as your standard year-long leagues as well.
Absolutely.
Let's get into the middle infield. We're going to get second base, shortstop, and then we still have outfielders to talk about, Kevin. But first, we're going to take one more quick break. All right, middle infielder here. Leads off with second base. I'm going to do it right this time. Isaiah Connor.
You were so excited about this guy that you wanted to talk about him on the previous episode.
And I did. I made it all the way through. And I'm like, and that's the wrong episode. But now I get to talk about Isaiah kind of fluff. I've never been excited to talk about IKF, but and neither is anybody else because he has not been drafted in an OC yet. But remember, he did end the season and should start the season as the leadoff hitter for any team. For Pittsburgh, obviously, but every leadoff hitter is going to have some value, no matter where you're actually drafting him or what size of a league, especially in your competitive 12s and any 15 teamers for that matter. Leadoff hitter there at second base. He's always found a way to play, even though he's kind of like the Kyle Finnegan approach, where it's like, you shouldn't be playing. You shouldn't be volume your way into relevancy. But you find a way to do it, whether it's through injuries or through, just being at the right place at the right time on the right team. And so that'll be somebody at least, again, second base. This is where you're going to find like those rabbits or those middle infielders are where you're going to find most of the opportunity to make up in the runs and stolen base categories in general. And so if you're going to find that backup second baseman. You're better off finding somebody who's in a leadoff spot than not as well, because most of the other options are
Yeah,
going to be at the bottom of the lineup.
yeah. This IKF is this guy that we've been looking at for like four seasons now and wondering why he gets the playing time he
Yeah.
gets, but he does. And we just have to accept this and embrace it, because there's no reason that he should not be being drafted in the top 360 players when we are almost certain he's the leadoff hitter for a team that isn't great. But as we talked coming into last season, has improved, and they did show that a little bit at times. They could score some runs really quickly. I'm going to look at. I told you last week I'd been looking at plate appearances by team, and right mid pack. In fact, top half, 14th in the league in plate appearances. Last year, 150 games in the leadoff spot for Pittsburgh was 690 plate appearances. That and he's not even being projected for that. That's 150 games. They're projecting him. Steamer anyway is projecting him for 130 games, and coming in at 120 plate appearances lower than that. So we may be able to boost this a little bit if he is indeed the everyday leadoff hitter. And I'm not even talking 162. I'm just talking 150. We're talking another 120 plate appearances. If he plays 150 games, he's already above that 60 run threshold you talked about. That's impossible to find this late in the draft. This guy should be being drafted. You're muted.
PLV projections has him projected at 551 plate appearances, and then that translates into 14 stolen bases and just shy 59 runs scored on the season. But also somebody who's not really, he's not going to help you in home runs or power, but he's not hurting your batting average either. So with that added volume, projected at a 259 batting average to go along with it. And as we can see from his player card, finished last season well above that, 269. So not hurting you in those areas when you are pinching him in. He's not like the Dylan Moores where you're like, all right, well, if he has to, I have to fill him in at my middle infielder. We can get all the good stuff without fearing losing out on anything else.
And he was a 2-WAR player last year. It's hard to get somebody like that out of your lineup. Yeah. Right. Teams value that.
Sure. Yep.
All
right. Second base, Kevin, who you got?
I went with a guy that I think underperformed in 2024 after we were really excited about him in 2023, Thairo Estrada.
And we didn't talk about him in the news section, so I'm glad you brought him up.
Yeah, because we talked about him a couple of weeks ago when he signed in Colorado, I believe.
Yeah.
So his performance last year, I believe, was due to playing through injury. The injury he missed time for in June, I went back and looked at the notes on that, and it was listed that he was when he went on the IL, that he'd been playing through multiple injuries when he finally went on the IL. And then later in the season, it was a wrist. So I really think the lack of production we saw out of him in 2024 was all injury related. And now this is the type of guy, when we're talking runs and stolen bases, that I fully expect. Now, San Francisco isn't a horrible spot for this either, but that massive outfield in California, right? That leads to a better on base percentage due to a higher BABIP, batting average of balls in play. So I really am looking forward to a bounce back from Tyro Estrada. Colorado gave him enough money that I'm not worried about him being rockied out of playing time. It's kind of what I feel
He's not
like.
their own prospect. They don't want to do that to him.
Right, exactly. And Steamer hasn't projected for 113 games, 464 plate appearances. I think we could see more than that. I absolutely see more than that. He's just in that limited playing time, 51 runs, double-digit stolen bases. I think we see closer to what we saw from him in 2023 in San Francisco and 2022. Well over 500 plate appearances, 60 to 70 plus runs, and 20 plus stolen bases with a good batting average. That 217 batting average last year, 100% injury related in my mind. I really think we're letting a guy go undrafted that it would be not just on my roster, but in my starting lineup most scoring periods throughout the fantasy season.
Nice. Yeah. You couldn't have found a better place for him to, try to make up for it. Not only with
I
the
may sit him on the road once in a while.
yeah,
You know that we have to with Rockies, right?
yeah, you have every once in a while. Um, and yeah, I won't spend too much time on my shortstop pick here, but it's worth mentioning Han-Sung Kim. We talked about him a little bit, obviously in the power. You put him in one of your power categories on the last episode. But of course, we know his calling card is always has been at least some speed, at least in his first year, in a full healthy year as well. We don't know where he's going to be. We don't know what role he's going to play. But to your point on the last episode, like him and his agent seem confident enough in his health that to turn down his player option and then, test out the market. So we think that he's going to find the right spot. And as soon as, no matter where he signs, it won't matter. He will go up in ADP. So if you are drafting now, this is when you can get him at this part. But in addition to a future pick that I won't spend a whole lot of time talking about, Dalton Varsho in my outfield spot, it's all about the health, and it can ultimately end up being a stash. And so you have to manage your drafting throughout if you drafted another stash earlier, maybe Kim is not really an option if you're not 110% sure of his health on opening day, which I don't think anybody here could be. So just something you always have to be considering those things, especially when you have limited roster spots. Where do you think Kim ends up going, Kevin? At this point,
that is a great question.
it's
that
kind of
I
like the
haven't
Pete
even really
Alonso
thought
thing. It's
about.
like there's only so many other
Yeah,
places that could use.
I haven't even really thought about. This is it's the type of guy I would have loved for the Royals to try to sign. He probably would not have signed with the Royals. This is probably a cop out because we tend to tie many players that come from Korea and Japan, but the Mariners, I could see that would really hurt our Dylan Moore
Dylan Moore,
conversation we just had. A little bit because he can play anywhere, but Mariners are the Dodgers sign everybody. Why does it?
yeah.
Maybe he'll
Why
go
not?
play with
Why
his
one
brother.
more?
Yeah, Padres
They already have
back with the Padres is actually back with the Padres. I think is probably the most likely now that I'm really thinking about it.
Yeah. Of course, there's always, other big markets like, New York and what have you that could, always use an extra piece here or there. But yeah, I think the Padres probably makes the most sense since he is fulfilling. But the fact that he also chose not to take his player option at that amount and look for something else elsewhere makes me a little bit worried that he probably might go somewhere else, unless it is a Pete Alonso situation where it's like there's literally nowhere else that makes sense.
Yeah,
make it make sense. Cool. So speaking of New York, you've got a New York based shortstop here that you can get pretty late. Talk to me about your shortstop pick here.
yeah. This for now is stolen base only, not runs. So not somebody I want in my lineup on a consistent basis. But we've talked about you don't have to be in the major league lineup to get his stolen bases. Luis Angel Acuna, I don't think has an everyday role. Roster Resource has him short side of platoon. It might be a little more than that, but that kills you in the run category, right? That we were talking about is so important and often overlooked. But he had 40 stolen bases at AAA last season. He had 57 in 2023. He had 40 in 2022. This guy, when on base, does steal bases. It would probably take an injury to get him in the lineup unless he starts eating into the way the roster is constructed now. Brett Beatty's the third baseman, and that has not been successful yet. So he could possibly play his way into playing time versus righties. If that would happen, he would become even more appealing to me, but he already is appealing as a stolen base streamer.
Yeah, I mean, and at this point in the draft, this is kind of what you're looking for. And if he's not going to be in that starting lineup, though, like he'll still be on the wire. Like you could still stream him pretty easily, even early on in the season, in the right matchups. So this is a player that you can wait and see, and you can find out.
He's
later.
only been drafted in 2 of the 5 online championships so far.
I'm actually surprised he was drafted in 2 of them. In that
Mets
many
fans.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do?
All right. Well, speaking of the Mets, I'm just gonna rattle off mine, and then you can get all 3 of yours all together. In the outfield, we talked about him a couple episodes ago, or you kind of just mentioned it, maybe just kind of in passing. Starling Marte looks like he is probably going to be playing most of his days as the D or with some DH time with the Mets. Giving him the opportunity to actually get more plate appearances, considering he's staying healthy. And they let him run last year. There's no reason why they wouldn't let him run even more so, or at least at the same rate, the same clip in 2025. If I'm not mistaken, I think this is the end of his contract as well with the Mets. So very similarly, we talked about with Charlie Morton. Just let the man do what he wants to do out there. Worry about it after the season ends. But he's shown no kind of reason for wanting to stop running. And if he can continue to play and volume his way into, regular playing time in the middle of the lineup, he's still going to score some runs. Now, if he can find a way to move up a little bit, which I don't know that he will, he'll probably stay in that 4 or 5 spot, or maybe even move down to a 6 spot as well if some things change. Maybe he takes a little bit of a hit on the runs, but we're still drafting our OF5 or our bench outfielder replacement past 325. So you always got to remember that's the context we're talking about here. We're not talking about our, top 3 outfielders that are going to be in our lineups on a regular basis. Is your opinion on Marte changed at all since you made that comment a couple weeks ago?
Oh, I love him here, and you alluded to it just to drive it home. Even if he does pull back on the stolen bases a little bit, it would still be double digits probably. And in the middle of this lineup, the runs will be there.
Yeah. Cool. Well, you've got a couple guys on here. I'm not going to spend any time talking about Darton Varsho because we don't know his health situation. We talked about him in the power situation, but if he is healthy, you won't be getting him at this round anyway. So, who you got in your outfield post 325?
Yeah, I got a couple of guys that are kind of a wait and see, but we can. Esteury Ruiz. Horrible defense and evidently upset ownership last season as well. So a couple of things that we need to see if he's recovered from. But when in the lineup, we know what he does on the base pass, right? So that we don't even really have to bring that up much more. Sal Frelick in Milwaukee can get us some runs and some stolen bases. Once again, when in the lineup, which it probably should be on a regular basis. And the reason I'm kind of going through these 2 guys fairly quickly is because this last guy is probably my favorite of all the players we've talked about today, because of his defense that will keep him in this improved Washington Nationals lineup on a daily basis in that 9-hole we were talking about. Sure, if he was leading off, I'd love for him to have that close to 150 more plate appearances. But in the 9-hole for this Washington Nationals lineup that ran more than anyone in baseball, and it really wasn't that close last season. I the batting average 256 last season, projected for 252. The runs scored, 75 runs scored in just 521 plate appearances. The lineup has improved, in my opinion. So I can't fathom that we have a guy here that's only been drafted in one of the 5 online championships thus far. If this continues, I'm going to have a lot of Jacob Young shares on my teams. And knowing this has to adjust what I do earlier in the draft, right? Because we do have to make up for the power.
Right.
We do have to make up for not only the home runs, but 36 RBI from one of your lineup positions is bad. Jacob, if you're drafting Aaron Judge in the first round, you're targeting Jacob Young later, in my opinion. Like, he should be a top of your
He's
queue,
the
just waiting for when you
yes.
think you have to take him, right?
Yeah, it's like
or your Jordan Alvarez.
You used
Same.
to hear about this all the time.
I would pair those so great.
The Joey Gallo pillow, type of situations where it's like, well, you found the guy who's getting you all the home runs and none of the stolen bases. Let's get you a guy that can get you all the stolen bases and literally none of the home runs. And then you do that with that pairing, as you mentioned. So, this all goes into the different types of strategies that you're going to take and how the draft is thrown at you. You don't necessarily have to go after Jacob Young. If you had somebody else earlier in your draft, it's not that you don't want to go after Jacob Young, but you probably can't.
You can't if you're lacking in home runs at this point. And by this point where you're taking him, you would know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not pushing him up into the top 200 or something, something silly. Cool. Great names to keep in mind. Of course, these are names. A lot of these names will be on your wire come the first week of the season as well. So a lot of the names, if you're interested about, keep them on your watch list, keep them, in the back of your head and see how they go through spring training, and then see if you want to spend some money on them in the first week of the season in case you did miss out on them toward the end of your drafts. Kevin, but I think that kind of sums up speed in a nutshell. Leave us here with any other, kind of wrap up news and notes of your own fruition, especially if it has to do with drafting speed.
Well, no, I think we covered pretty much everything, because when we do these category episodes, we kind of lead off with our general thoughts on things. I think what I would like to end with is shoot us some DMs and let's get these listener leagues going. Mm-hmm. Let's start drafting. I'm ready.
Yeah, let's do it. I am ready to start off my first draft of 2025 myself. So,
that's right. It'll be your first one. Yeah,
it will. Well, I don't count any of my mock drafts, and I don't count the one we did together live. Right. This will be my first solo. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Awesome.
Cool. Can't wait to hear the ding over and over again when you're on the clock. And with all that, though, that is going to wrap it up for episode 197 on the wire. On behalf of Kevin Hastings, I am Adam Howe. Thanks for listening. We bid you goodbye.